Do you remember those Little House on the Prairie holiday suppers that always looked simple, but somehow felt like home? They brought comfort, care, and gratitude to every wooden table long before boxed mixes and shortcuts took their place. But somewhere along the way, those Prairie recipes vanished from our tables. When did we stop cooking Christmas from the heart? We're counting down the 25 most beloved holiday recipes that once filled Prairie kitchens with warmth and wonder. From edible ornaments and buttery breads to pies, preserves, and the legendary main course, each entry captures the cozy ingenuity and simple joys that Ma Ingalls Wilder described in Little House Christmases. Some were luxuries, others born of thrift, but all held families together. Which vanished Prairie favorite will take the top spot? Let's begin our holiday journey with number 25. Popcorn balls brought sparkle to Prairie Christmas trees and laughter to the kitchen. With corn stored from autumn, families popped kernels over the wood stove, using wire poppers or heavy iron pans. Sugar or molasses syrup simmered on the stove, then poured over the mountain of popcorn. Buttered hands shaped the sticky mixture into balls, still warm and fragrant. Some were strung on thread to loop around the tree. Others nestled in baskets for children to share. These edible ornaments cost almost nothing, yet they turned a handful of corn and a spoonful of syrup into holiday magic. Simple, sweet, and meant for both decoration and delight. On the Prairie, even the smallest treat could fill a home with joy. Sugar cookies brought a rare sparkle to Prairie Christmases, a treat reserved for the most special days. In the weeks before the holiday, store ledgers in towns like De Smet recorded a sudden uptick in sugar sales, as families saved up for a half-pound or so to make a single batch. Rolled thin and cut into stars or hearts, each dough ball yielded about 30 cookies, enough for every child to hang one on the tree and still have a few for the Christmas table. White sugar was precious. Its cost far above that of molasses or sorghum, and many Prairie children tasted it only at Christmas. These simple cookies, sometimes tied with thread and looped on branches, were a quiet luxury, a sweet shining memory in a season built on thrift. Hot cider brought comfort to Prairie gatherings as the days grew short and the wind sharpened. Apples, pressed by hand in autumn, yielded a golden juice stored in barrels deep in the cellar, waiting for Christmas. On holiday afternoons, someone would ladle out the cider and heat it slowly over the stove, stirring in sticks of cinnamon, a few cloves, and sometimes a ribbon of dried orange peel. If the family had saved one from a rare winter shipment, the scent drifted through the house, mingling with wood smoke and baking bread. Unlike milk or cream, cider could be shared by everyone, young and old, and it warmed cold hands after sledding or barn chores. A mug of spiced cider, steaming in the lamplight, was a simple pleasure that made the whole room feel close and bright. Winter teas brought neighbors together when the Prairie wind cut sharpest. In church ledgers from Dakota Territory, weekly teas appear as a thread of comfort. 12 names listed, one battered teapot passed from hand to hand. The tea itself was often a blend of whatever could be found: dried mint, wild bergamot, sometimes a pinch of black tea saved from a precious tin. When supplies ran low, Prairie cooks steeped apple peels, raspberry leaves, or even dried sumac for a tart warming cup. These gatherings offered more than a drink. They were a lifeline. In the hush of winter, sharing news and stories over simple tea helped families feel less alone, and the warmth lingered long after the last drop was poured. Venison stew was a dish born from the wild heart of the Prairie. When the larder ran low and winter pressed in, A successful hunt meant supper could be hearty and hot. An entry from an 1887 Dakota diary tells how a young buck brought down after hours in the snow became the centerpiece of Christmas dinner. Chunks of venison, browned in a heavy kettle, simmered for 4 hours with potatoes, turnips, and carrots. The root vegetables that lasted through months in the cellar. The long, slow cooking softened the meat and thickened the broth until it was rich and filling. Unlike the pork or chicken that came from the barnyard, venison reminded families that the land itself could provide if they had the skill and luck to claim it. Salted and smoked ham was a cornerstone of prairie survival, especially when the deep cold set in and fresh meat was scarce. Hog killing season arrived in late autumn when families gathered to butcher, brine, and smoke enough pork to last through the winter. For every gallon of water in the brine barrel, 2 pounds of coarse salt were stirred in, sometimes with a handful of brown sugar and a pinch of saltpeter for good measure. Ham soaked for several weeks before being hung in the smokehouse, where hickory, or more often willow wood, smoldered day and night. 7 days of slow smoking gave the meat its deep flavor and preserved it for months. Wrapped in cloth and stored in the cellar rafters, a single ham could feed a family well past Christmas, a testament to both hard work and the science of keeping hunger at bay. Cornmeal muffins stood as a daily bread on prairie tables, offering comfort that could swing from sweet to savory with a change of the pantry. With just 1 cup of meal, a touch more milk than flour, and a spoonful of lard, a dozen golden muffins could be baked in the cast-iron gem pan, a prized tool in many kitchens. These little breads absorbed gravy at supper or honey at breakfast, their moist crumb a result of careful milk-to-meal balance. Corn's versatility meant muffins worked beside ham, stew, or even a spoonful of preserves. Not just for holidays, but always welcome, they bridged the gap between grain and protein, stretching what the prairie gave into something warm and filling. Molasses cookies were a staple in prairie kitchens, offering a sweet comfort when white sugar was too dear or scarce. Most families used sorghum, a crop that could yield up to 60 gallons of syrup per acre, making it both practical and plentiful. Children waited for winter, when dough chilled on the porch, ready to be rolled and cut into rounds or hearts. The deep, spicy aroma of ginger and cinnamon filled the house as pans baked in the wood stove. These cookies stood alongside gingerbread, both relying on the rich, dark sweetness of molasses or sorghum rather than expensive cane sugar. A visit to the local sorghum mill was a highlight for many children, watching the thick syrup pour from the press, knowing it would soon flavor their holiday treats. On the prairie, molasses cookies were everyday magic, simple, sturdy, and always welcome with a cup of milk or tea. Gingerbread loaf brought a deep, spiced warmth to prairie holiday tables, its scent curling through kitchens on cold afternoons. Molasses and ginger, both precious, gave the loaf its rich color and bold flavor. Even a single ounce of ginger could cost as much as a pound of pork, so families stretched their supply, slicing each loaf thin to make the spice last. Sour milk started the rise, reacting with baking soda to give the bread its tender crumb. Baked in a square tin, gingerbread was often served at winter teas or tucked into lunch pails for a special treat. The tradition of spiced breads ran deep, a taste of old country holidays adapted to frontier life. On the prairie, gingerbread meant comfort, each slice a fragrant promise against the long winter ahead. Sourdough bread was the daily anchor of Prairie kitchens, its tangy crumb rising from a living starter that could outlast even the hardest winter. Families fed their starter with flour, and, when times were lean, a bit of potato water, an old trick for coaxing bubbles from tired yeast. Kept near the hearth, where the temperature hovered close to 68 degrees, the crock was tended like a member of the household. Some starters lasted 5 years or more, carried west in jars wrapped in cloth, passed from mother to daughter. Each loaf was shaped by hand, left to rise in the gentle warmth, and baked until the crust sang when tapped. Sourdough's quiet presence on the holiday table spoke of continuity. The same bread for every day, and for feasts, linking generations with each slice. Wholeberry cranberry preserves brought a touch of brightness to Prairie cupboards, their garnet color shining through glass jars lined on cellar shelves. Unlike the familiar jelly, these preserves kept the berries intact, suspended in thick syrup or sometimes steeped in a splash of brandy for special occasions. The process began with a careful simmer. Berries added to hot syrup, cooked just until their skins split, but not so long that they lost their shape. Pioneer guides from 1889 described a syrup dense enough to coat a spoon, a key to keeping the preserves shelf-stable for up to 3 years. Jars were sealed with paper dipped in brandy or egg white, then stored away from light and heat. During the holidays, a spoonful of these tart, jewel-like berries brightened bread, muffins, or even a slice of cold ham, proof that Prairie cooks found ways to save summer's sharpest flavors for the heart of winter. Snow candy brought a sense of wonder to Prairie winters, turning a handful of maple syrup and a pan of fresh snow into a treat that vanished as quickly as it appeared. When the wind stilled and the snow lay clean and deep, children hurried outside, scooping only the freshest layer, always away from the house and chimney, where no soot could settle. In the kitchen, maple syrup simmered over a steady fire, watched closely until it reached the soft ball stage, about 234 to 240 degrees Fahrenheit. A spoonful dropped onto the snow set within 10 seconds, curling into amber ribbons that could be lifted and stretched like taffy. An 1881 diary recalls the delight. The snow was white as milk, and the candy cooled so fast we barely had time to taste it before it was gone. Snow candy was fleeting, a sweet, magical pause in the heart of winter, remembered long after the snow had melted. Maple candies brought a taste of the woods to Prairie Christmas gatherings, especially in regions where sugar maples lined the riverbanks. When the sap began to run in early spring, families collected it by the bucket, boiling down 40 gallons to make just 1 gallon of syrup. That syrup became a treasure, poured into carved wooden molds to set into small amber candies. Children waited for these shapes, leaves, hearts, or simple squares, knowing each piece carried the memory of sap-boiling parties and the work of many hands. Unlike refined sugar, maple syrup was a local sweetener, drawn from the land and shared among neighbors. On the holiday table, maple candies stood apart, a pure, unrefined sweetness, shaped by the seasons and the skill of Prairie cooks. For many, it was a taste of home that store-bought treats could never match. Dried apple pie was a winter triumph born from autumn's careful work. In early September, apple rings hung above the stove, strung on cotton thread, slowly shrinking as the weeks passed. By December, these leathery slices filled linen sacks in the pantry, each one a promise of sweetness when fresh fruit was long gone. For Christmas, cooks would simmer the dried rings in a broth of water and molasses, coaxing them back to plumpness and lending a deep caramel note to the filling. The rehydrated apples, thickened with a spoonful of flour and a dusting of cinnamon, nestled into a flaky crust, often made with whatever fat was on hand. Unlike the fresh apple pies of autumn, this version relied on storage and ingenuity. turning what was saved into something festive. Dried apple pie proved that with patience and planning, Prairie families could savor a taste of summer even in the heart of winter. Plum pudding brought a taste of far-off places to Prairie Christmas tables, especially for families living near the rail lines. When the train arrived with its precious cargo, a pound of raisins might cost 16 cents, a small fortune, but just enough for a holiday splurge. In kitchens warmed by the stove, cooks mixed flour, suet, breadcrumbs, and dried fruit, then tied the heavy batter into a cloth and lowered it into a pot of boiling water. Hours later, the pudding emerged dense and fragrant, ready to be sliced and served with a drizzle of sweet sauce. Some families added a dash of brandy or swapped in dried apples for pricier currants, creating their own Prairie variant. Plum pudding was never an everyday treat. Its richness and imported fruit marked it as a luxury, a dish that signaled both celebration and the reach of the railroad's promise. Eggnog crowned the Prairie holiday table, a frothy toast saved for Christmas when the barn was cold and the milk pail felt lighter each day. In Ma Ingalls Wilder's Farmer Boy, Almanzo remembers the rich, sweet nog, milk and cream, eggs from well-fed hens, and enough sugar to make it festive. On most winter mornings, eggs were scarce and milk was rationed for butter and cheese. But for Christmas, families whisked together what they had, sometimes standing by the stove to warm their hands as they beat the eggs by hand. The mixture was poured back and forth between bowls to make it light, then chilled on the snowbank outside the kitchen door. For safety today, cooks use pasteurized eggs, but the spirit remains. A creamy cup, dusted with nutmeg, shared as the oil lamp flickered and laughter echoed off frosted windows. While cider was for every day, eggnog was the holiday's lift, a sign that for one night, the Prairie could taste a little like celebration. Each sip was a promise that scarcity could give way, at least for a moment, to richness and cheer. Vinegar pie stands as a testament to Prairie ingenuity, a dessert born from the need to make do when lemons and fresh fruit were out of reach. On the Dakota frontier, a pie could come together with nothing more than flour, sugar, water, and a splash of vinegar drawn from the pantry barrel. Period cookbooks from the 1880s describe a method both simple and clever. For each cup of water, a tablespoon of vinegar sharpens the filling, mimicking the tartness of citrus. The custard is boiled and thickened with flour, then poured into a waiting crust and baked until set. Without imported lemons or even apples, Prairie cooks relied on this trick to bring brightness to the Christmas table. Vinegar pie was never about luxury. It was about resourcefulness, turning the humblest staples into something that tasted like a treat. Ma Ingalls Wilder recalled such pies as special occasion fare, proof that with a steady hand and a little creativity, even a sparse pantry could yield a holiday dessert. For many families, vinegar pie was a favorite, its tangy sweet filling a reminder that celebration didn't depend on abundance, but on the art of making something out of almost nothing. Heart-shaped cakes offered a small but shining moment in the Ingalls family's Christmas, especially for the youngest children. Laura wrote of the year each child found a tiny cake at their plate, baked in a tin mold, dusted with a rare sprinkle of white sugar. In a time when 2 ounces of sugar might be all a family could spare for baking, these cakes became tokens of affection as much as dessert. A mail-order catalog might list a heart-shaped tin for a few pennies, but the real cost lay in the precious sugar set aside weeks in advance. Baking day meant careful measuring and even more careful dividing, so that every child received a cake of their own. The soft crumb, the sparkle of sugar, the simple shape. Each detail spoke of love in a season of thrift. These cakes weren't grand or elaborate, but they lingered in memory. A gentle reminder that even the smallest gift, made by hand and given with care, could fill a prairie Christmas with sweetness. Biscuits belonged to every prairie Christmas, as welcome as the warmth from the hearth. In the Ingalls cabin, Ma would turn a bowl of flour, a pinch of salt, and a spoonful of lard into a soft dough, rolling it out by hand to just a quarter-inch thick. Prairie cooks relied on rendered fat, lard, or tallow, since butter was often saved for special occasions. The dough was cut into rounds, then placed in a heavy Dutch oven, the cast-iron lid heaped with glowing coals to mimic an oven's steady heat. Temperature control meant tending both above and below, checking for golden edges after just 15 minutes. The smell of baking bread filled the small room, promising comfort even on the coldest days. These biscuits were quick to make and hearty enough to fill hungry bellies, served hot with a spoonful of preserves or a pat of whatever fat was left. Today, most kitchens use butter and a modern oven, but the spirit endures. A simple bread, made in minutes, connecting holiday tables across generations. On the prairie, a plate of biscuits meant the hearth was alive and the family was home. Pancake men brought whimsy to prairie breakfasts, especially on mornings when the frost pressed thick against the kitchen window. Laura Ingalls Wilder remembered how Ma would ladle batter onto the griddle, shaping each cake into a little man, arms, legs, and sometimes even a raisin for a button. The secret was in the batter, thicker than regular flapjacks, just enough flour to hold the shape as it sizzled and puffed. Each child waited, fork in hand, for their own edible doll to be flipped and browned. These playful cakes weren't just food. They were a rare treat, both breakfast and toy, a bit of holiday magic conjured from the simplest pantry. In the big woods, Laura described the delight of cutting off a pancake man's arm or leg, bite by bite, savoring every mouthful. No fancy molds or gadgets, only Ma's steady hand and a hot griddle. The tradition turned a handful of flour, milk, and eggs into laughter and memory, a holiday gift that disappeared as quickly as it was made. For prairie children, pancake men were a promise that the season could hold surprises, even when the world outside seemed cold and still. Apple pie was the centerpiece of any prairie holiday table, a dessert that brought together the warmth of the hearth and the promise of comfort after a long winter's work. Almanzo Wilder in Farmer Boy dreamed of spicy apple pie with thick, rich juice and a crumbly crust, the kind Ma made with lard, not butter, for flakiness that could stand up to a generous filling. On the prairie, apples didn't come fresh in December. Instead, women soaked dried slices in water overnight, coaxing them back to life with patience and a touch of molasses. Cinnamon, bought by the ounce at 10 cents, a holiday splurge, was measured with care, the scent filling the kitchen as the pie baked. A pinch of nutmeg or clove might be added if the family had it, but cinnamon was the heart of the holiday. The pie's top crust was often rolled thin to make flour last, yet still managed to turn golden and crisp. Served warm, with steam rising and the tang of spice in the air, apple pie was more than dessert. It was a reminder of autumn's harvest, stored away and brought out for Christmas, a taste of abundance in a season built on making do. Cranberry jelly brought a flash of color to the prairie holiday table, its deep crimson a promise of brightness against the winter white. Laura Ingalls Wilder remembered how Ma would stew the berries with sugar, stirring until the pot yielded a trembling, jewel-toned jelly. Cranberries, tart and wild, needed careful attention. A 3-to-1 ratio of fruit to sugar, boiled until the mixture thickened and cleared. For most families, sugar was a rare luxury, set aside in precious allotments of 2 to 5 pounds, just for Christmas. Each spoonful of jelly was a small act of celebration, a way to stretch a costly ingredient into something that could be shared by all. The jelly's vivid hue stood out among brown breads and salted meats, a reminder that even in the leanest seasons, there could be something beautiful and sweet on the table. In the long winter, a dish of cranberry jelly was more than a relish. It was a sign that hope and cheer could survive the cold, carried on the memory of Ma's careful hands and the taste of summer's wild fruit preserved against the dark. Potatoes formed the backbone of prairie cellars, packed by the bushel, 40 pounds at a time, layered with straw and set against the earth's steady chill. Through months of deep snow, these roots waited in the dark, holding the promise of comfort. On Christmas morning, Ma would lift the trapdoor, her breath curling in the cold, and bring up enough potatoes to fill the biggest kettle. Peeled and boiled until tender, they were mashed by hand with a sturdy wooden pestle, the steam rising in clouds above the stove. Some families favored a splash of thick cream for richness if the cow was still giving. Others used milk, poured in slowly, working it through until the potatoes turned smooth and pale. Butter, when there was enough to spare, melted into golden pools atop each mound. A pinch of salt, a twist of black pepper. Simple, but never plain. For many, mashed potatoes were more than a side dish. They anchored the holiday meal, stretching to fill every plate, soaking up gravy and laughter alike. In lean years, extra milk or a spoonful of lard made them go further. But on Christmas, the bowl was always heaped high. The cellar's steady cool kept potatoes fit for months, a quiet insurance against hunger. On the holiday table, this humble dish became a feast, creamy, sustaining, and filled with the warmth of home. Each serving reminded the family that even in the hardest winters, the earth's gifts could be transformed into comfort with a strong hand and a generous spirit. Cornbread stuffing transformed everyday grain into a holiday treasure on prairie tables. Cornmeal, at just 2 cents a pound, was the most affordable staple in the merchant ledgers of Dakota Territory, far cheaper than white flour and steady in supply even when wheat harvests failed. For Christmas, families saved back their best cornmeal, sifting it fine and mixing it with chopped onion, dried sage, and a pinch of salt. The crumbs soaked up savory drippings from the roasting pan, binding together in a skillet with just enough broth to keep things moist but not heavy. Some cooks added a handful of wild herbs or a chopped apple for sweetness, stretching the flavor when onions ran low. Unlike the quick muffins or daily Johnny cakes, this stuffing was baked slowly in the oven's gentle heat, turning golden at the edges while staying soft in the middle. In lean years, lard or even a spoonful of salt pork fat stood in for butter. Today, most kitchens reach for butter without a second thought, but the heart of the dish remains the same. The right balance of crumbs to drippings was a matter of feel, not measurement, a skill passed from mother to daughter, measured by the way the spoon moved through the pan. Cornbread stuffing was never just a side. It was a way to turn the most basic grain into something special, a savory bed for the roasted hen that crowned the Christmas meal. Even in years when the cellar was half empty, this dish reminded prairie families that comfort could be coaxed from simplicity and that the holiday table belonged to everyone. A roasted hen was the holiday centerpiece prairie families waited for all winter. Ma Ingalls Wilder wrote of the moment in these happy golden years. A big fat hen stuffed and roasted brown and juicy. On the prairie, such a bird was more than supper. It was proof that months of careful tending, feeding, and saving had finally paid off. Hens laid fewer eggs in winter, so to have one plump enough for roasting meant the family had managed their flock well, resisting the urge to butcher early or trade away the best layers. In 1885, a live chicken might fetch 30 cents at the general store, no small sum when every penny counted. Most families raised their own, and the Christmas hen was chosen with care, plucked and dressed on Christmas Eve, then left to chill in the cold pantry overnight. The roasting itself was a ritual. In the smallest cabins, the cast-iron Dutch oven served as both oven and hearth. A rack of twisted wire or a few smooth stones lifted the hen above the drippings, letting the heat circulate and crisp the skin. Goose fat, rendered from the fall slaughter and saved in a crock, was brushed over the bird every half hour, basting it to a deep golden brown. The scent of roasting poultry mingled with wood smoke, and the sharp, sweet tang of sage and onion from the stuffing, a mixture of cornbread crumbs, wild herbs, and whatever else the larder could spare. Children counted down the hours, noses pressed to the kitchen door, watching Ma lift the heavy lid to check for doneness. The juices ran clear, the skin crackled, and the promise of celebration filled the small house. When the hen was finally carved, each slice was met with gratitude, a rare richness after months of salted pork and dried beans. Even the bones were saved, boiled for broth to stretch the feast into the days ahead. The roasted hen did more than fill plates. It crowned the holiday, turning a season of scarcity into a moment of abundance. On the prairie, this was Christmas at its brightest. A table gathered close, the warmth of the oven, and the taste of hope made real in every bite. From humble popcorn balls at the bottom of our list to the triumphant roasted hen at the very top, these 25 Prairie holiday recipes reveal a world where scarcity met celebration, and every ingredient counted. Across all entries, one pattern stands out. Creativity and resourcefulness shaped holiday tables, turning everyday staples like potatoes, cornmeal, and dried apples into the centerpiece of family feasts. Some of the most surprising entries, like vinegar pie or snow candy, remind us how settlers transformed simple, even unexpected items into cherished traditions. Ranking was based on historical authenticity, emotional significance in Ma Ingalls Wilder's stories, and the dish's role in the communal holiday meal. Together, these recipes show that true holiday coziness on the prairie was less about abundance and more about making do, sharing, and savoring the moment. The vanished flavors of Little House teach us that warmth, memory, and togetherness are the real holiday ingredients, timeless, no matter what's on the table.